Star Trek Supplemental. Trekking along.
Hey, Chase.
Hey, Sam.
So we just saw an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Parallels.
You listening to me?
Yes, sir.
You seem awfully tense for a man who just came back from vacation.
Today is my birthday.
Now, this is one of those episodes that has taken some heat on the internet, but what were your impressions of it?
I really liked the episode. I'm kind of surprised to hear that there was a lot of heat for it because I feel like there was a lot of really interesting scientific concepts behind it. You know, all of the implementation of quantum theories and whatnot.
Extends to the subatomic level. It's asynchronous with normal matter. In essence, Captain, Mr. Worf does not belong in our universe.
What?
All matter in the universe resonates on a quantum level with a unique signature. That signature is constant. It cannot be changed through any known process. It is the basic foundation of existence.
Are you saying that Worf's quantum signature is different from ours?
Yes, sir.
But really, regardless of all of that, you know, you can make a great sci-fi show out of anything, basically. But in my opinion, a great show, regardless of whether it's sci-fi oriented or not, has to have a heart at the core of the story, right? There has to be a character. There has to be a reason for why I care. And for me, I cared about Worf's character in this episode because he had to make a lot of really hard character decisions, you know? He's suddenly thrust into these different universes, such as one where Deanna Troi is his wife, whereas in the actual universe he's normally accustomed to, she's just kind of like a close friend.
Now, I know you don't want to talk about what happened on the bridge, but there are times when it's just best to let things out. Come on. If you can't talk to me, who can you talk to?
I do not believe this is appropriate behavior.
Even for your wife?
Wife!
And so he has to make this decision to untether himself to go back to his reality. He has to deal with the fact that Alexander doesn't exist in some universe that he's in. Mm-hmm. And he has to constantly grapple with, you know, these altering realities. I thought it was a great episode.
I viewed this kind of like a writer's episode. Now, folks online have said that the reason why season 1 of TNG was bad was because the show needed to find its footing and it was trying things. It was so experimental. And then there are other folks who say that season 7 was bad because the show had already found its formula and it was so much resisting the formula, diverting from it, and they were trying new things. So we were saying, yeah, this is one of those times where it seems to have worked out, right? And with Plinkett, of course, the Plinkett review, one particular Plinkett review that includes Parallels, the guys over there at Red Letter, they hate this episode, at least insofar as Mike was concerned with the character.
Star Trek was totally ruined in what I consider to be the worst episode of Star Trek ever. Parallels. In this episode, Worf passes through some kind of space thing that makes him aware each time that the universe fractures into other parallel universes. We discover that the universe fractures into other universes like every 5 minutes or whatever. In the end, we see thousands of enterprises from other timelines all converging together. The fact that an incalculable amount of yous are existing in other timelines, and that you're not unique and actually kind of disposable, gosh, that's like the most shocking and devastating thing that you could ever discover.
With the episode, one of the things that in the Plinkett video they said was that in Parallels, possibilities, and you get to see all of them, that really it cheapens the experience, and therefore nothing really means anything, nothing really matters if everything can happen.
As an apparatus, we actually have Worf as the central character, and I think that I can kind of understand the direction they're going with that criticism and saying that there's kind of endless possibilities. But the fact of the matter is that the show is grounded in the character of Worf because we're really being focalized through his perspective and seeing all these events. It's not like we're getting this, you know, this wide grasping view of everything. It's that we're specifically seeing things through Worf's eyes as he's experiencing events. So for me, I don't really see that kind of overarching, there's too much going on. For me, Worf as a character kind of grounds all of that.
Right, and you could say, playing devil's advocate here, you could say that the episode is bad because it's one of those episodes that they hit the reset button again. It kind of like yesterday's Enterprise. But like yesterday's Enterprise, which again is critically thought of as a really good episode, well, it's like, well, what's the difference between that and Parallels? There really is a takeaway in which the nature of people's relationships changes. So we get Tasha Yar coming back in yesterday's Enterprise, and now it's, what was her name? Sela, I guess, the character played by Denise Crosby.
The Romulan.
The Romulan daughter. So there are certain consequences. Well, there are consequences of this episode too, in a character relationship way that says now we have this connection between this new relationship between Worf and Deanna Troi. And of course it doesn't last, but there is something lasting.
I will say that they do kind of play it up later on in other episodes, right, in the season?
That's right, in the episode All Good Things, the two-parter, the series finale. And it's not really a heavy element later, and it is changed later, but it does something different with the characters there at the end. It's kind of the swan song relationship of the series. It's like, what would happen if we put these two together? And they really pair off each other very well throughout the series. And here we get to see them spending practically half an episode together working. And it's really at the point in the episode where Deanna Troi enters the picture that things start to make sense, that Worf starts to find his footing. Now, there were certain places in the episode that were stronger than others. Some of the weaker areas were the playing around with the painting. It's like, okay, we see the painting move. Now we see the painting change from the scene of battle that's some sort of impressionistic piece. Now it's a starship. Now it's back to the impressionistic piece.
Counselor, the painting that Commander Data gave me, it has moved.
Worf, I hung that painting there at your birthday party, remember?
Oh, the painting has changed. Don't you see it? Your hair and your clothing, they have changed as well.
Worf, maybe you should come with me to sickbay.
Now, Mr. Wolf. Now!
Okay, we all get it. We don't have to have this play out anymore. We get it. The little nuance points were really neat, though. So, for instance, the changing of the color of Worf's uniform, the changing of the cake, little subtle things. But it did so many of them, I thought, okay, we get it. Can we progress with the plot now? I also liked the flip of making the Bajorans the enemies at the end in an homage to DS9, perhaps, which was now on for several seasons. At the time of this season.
I could see a point being made too that, you're talking about all these kind of like little changes happening, like the paintings being changed around and whatnot, or people's uniforms being changed. Mm-hmm. I think that for me, when you have this concept playing out on the screen, you could probably do a lot more with that. And I feel like in a lot of ways, the episode was kind of like you're saying with the paintings. It's like the painting is here, the painting is there, and whatnot. But then compare that to something like Deanna Troi suddenly being Worf's wife. That's a really drastic change in the actual universe, right? In terms of this episode, they could have done more things like that, where it's actually like positionality in terms of the characters and whatnot. Like that's why I really like the part where Picard isn't alive anymore, because that's an actual implication on the universe that's pretty grandiose compared to saying like people's uniforms changing, the painting being in different spots. I think that they could have done more with like those overarching things. If you have like an infinite number of universes you can work with, there's an infinite number of possibilities you can work with. And I feel like they didn't really take advantage of that in terms of like the grand scale.
Right. And if we follow the Plinkett logic here and say that this is really kind of a throwaway episode because everything doesn't matter, but there's a really good character moment that we would overlook with that view. And that is where the Riker that eventually gets Worf home, he takes over the captaincy of the Enterprise. He says 3 or 4 years after the occasion in which Captain Picard is killed at the encounter with the Borg. And that's a good character moment when he gets to say hello to Picard, who for him has been dead 3 or 4 years.
On screen.
Captain, it would appear that we have found the quantum signature you were looking for.
Data believes that by sending Worf back through the fissure again, it would return us all to our proper realities.
Our data has said the same thing.
We need you to send us your shuttlecraft Curie.
We're launching it now.
Thank you. It's good to see you again, Captain. It's been a long time.
And that's a small point, and maybe it doesn't matter in the grand scheme, but it does tell us about Riker's character in this hypothetical future. What would he actually do as captain? And I was interested in that plot line. It's like maybe some of these alternate plot lines, maybe these are some of the things they could explore in the new show.
They would make great episodes.
Right, yeah. Right. Just understanding we can do different things with characters. And that was one of the problems with TNG and the TOS show, was that maybe they didn't go far enough and do enough with the characters to get them actually motivated to change. I know that we've had a lot of things happen where characters die because they had bad contract negotiation, or characters die because, well, what about characters who die who are not supposed to, and then you have to deal with that on the show? The Tasha Yar thing was wrapped up so nice and neat, they hardly ever went back to it. But what if that actually happened on the show, and then you had an alternate reality Well, that was what really happened in yesterday's Enterprise, but TNG didn't do it enough, maybe in the new show.
Well, I have to say that I think it's kind of easy to hand wave away the fact that, this episode in the grand scheme of things doesn't really matter because you can just change the course of reality, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really discounting the fact that, I'm going to use a term that's normally used in a negative way and use it in a positive way, that it kind of discounts the character baggage. Because you have to think in terms of these events, the character does bring a lot of baggage with him, right? It's not as though none of this actually matters because, the course of reality, this timeline isn't really affected by what happens. It actually does matter because it matters to Worf as a character. It doesn't discount the fact that he actually experienced these things and he has to carry them with him, which is why in the actual episode as it ends, we see him having, a bottle of champagne with Deanna Troi.
You do not have to leave. I have not had dinner. Would you care to join me?
I'd love to.
Champagne.
That's actually an indication that his character is doing something differently than he would have done before, and that means that there's actual change in the character happening in the course of the episode.
Right, and it also, you could take the critique that says, like a dream episode, it was all a dream, and you go to TV tropes, and there are hundreds upon hundreds of examples of why this is a bad thing. But this is an episode where, because we have that inclination of who the character is different, we as the viewer are different. We learn something about the character and about their potential, and that's really what made yesterday's Enterprise a great episode. Even though a lot of those character moments were lost, Plinkett might say, because the reset button was hit. Well, who cares? Because we as the viewer get to know this dimension about our characters and how they would behave in this certain situation. So we get the advantage of having a character moment, but at the same time, the show gets to have the handy reset button hit, and they get to go on with the continuity of character. And again, the reason why they keep characters the same, right, from week to week on shows like this, is because they know it's a marketing technique. It'll bring people back to have a constant sense of who these people are.
Well, you see something like this in comic books, right? Mm-hmm. In a lot of comic books, there's always this hesitation to kill off characters, depending on the comic book, because sometimes they don't. But oftentimes, if Batman wants to send someone to Arkham Asylum, right, they just send the villain to Arkham Asylum and they stay there until inevitably the character comes out. Mm-hmm. The idea is that they can, because, comics are serials, they can just kind of milk characters, to be honest, right? They don't have to necessarily kill off a character and then cut off a crucial plot. Why do that when you can bring it back at some point in the future when you need to? Mm-hmm. I think that there's something similar here, but I think that we can't ever discount the fact that these events do impact characters, right? Because I would kind of agree with the argument that we could hand wave this away if Worf didn't learn anything from this episode and everything went back to normal. I think what matters, though, is that over time, this does have a lasting effect on him. We see this in, like I said at the end of the episode, this changes his relationship with Deanna Troi, even if she doesn't know it yet, right? But it also has a minor effect we see in later episodes. So it's not like this is resolved and then nothing comes out of it. I think it has a lasting effect on the character. And ultimately, to me, that's what matters more so than having a lasting effect on the plot.
And one minor critique I have of the episode, it's Worf's birthday, and his son is not there. And they start to tell the reason why Alexander isn't there.
This is from Alexander. He gave it to me just before he left to visit your parents. Thank you.
What is it, Worf?
It's a cast of Alexander's forehead, the ridges of a warrior.
He wished he could have been here when you got back from shore leave. You should have seen him, Worf. He stayed up all night talking about how proud he was of his father.
Thank you for watching him while I was away.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
So, how old are you, Mr. Worf?
And you think about the episode and say, okay, well, that makes sense. If he's going to have an alternate universe where he has different children, well, maybe it makes sense for the actor, Alexander's character, for them not to be on set. But then you start thinking about it and you think, well, wait a second. We're told in the episode that Alexander went to visit Worf's parents, Alexander's grandparents, the Rashenkos, on Earth. Okay, why would he schedule a visit with the grandparents around his father's birthday? Especially in the episode they were telling how Deanna Troi was telling how proud Alexander was. You're saying this son who is always telling people how happy and proud of your father he is, that you're not going to be at his birthday party? Now, maybe they didn't have the budget to bring the character back this week for the episode. But it just seems like a plot hole that I really wish they would have dealt with. Maybe they could have even used some recycled footage of Alexander instead of showing the plaster mold.
Even more so than the actual plot hole point is I think that having Alexander there as a character, would have even burgeoned more of the point, which is that in this alternate universe, Alexander wasn't even there for Worf, correct?
Right.
And so having Alexander there would have actually been an emotional moment where Worf, we could even see Worf coming back to Alexander with a new appreciation for his son.
Yeah, because what if you're watching him in the room and you see Geordi's visor wave in front of him when he's walking by, and all of a sudden Alexander, who was just sitting there on Worf's couch, is gone. The plaster mold is gone. Every trace of Alexander is gone. And then you have the situation where Worf has to deal with this emotionally as a character. And then what if you've got the situation now where Deanna Troi says, well, what about our children? And then Worf says, what children? And then the door opens and then they come running in and it's this 2 and 3-year-old kid who are half Klingon, half Beta Z. And it's like, wait a second. How do I, Worf, feel about this? These children are not mine. Where's Alexander? That would have been a dynamic character moment. We're just told that, but we don't get shown it.
This is a good example of telling instead of showing.
Right.
In terms of storytelling. And for me, sometimes there's a good balance between exposition in a story versus, making sure that everything is displayed enough for the reader to sort of grasp everything going on.
Sure.
And for me, that aspect wasn't really played enough. Having that contrast between, the children with Deanna Troi with Alexander would have been great in terms of the story. I could imagine Worf coming home and seeing Alexander and even, having an almost sort of intimate moment with his son where he's saying, Alexander, I can't believe you're here. And Alexander's like, well, what's wrong, Dad? I never actually left. Right.
Right.
And it's kind of like, that's a moment that Worf understands and the audience understands why Worf's having that moment. Kind of what happens with Deanna Troi, except I think that would have had a more profound impact. This idea that Worf really wants to go back to this alternate universe because his son is still living there.
Exactly. All right, well, I think we've talked this out, so thanks, Chase. I appreciate your thoughts on the episode, and we'll have to do a little more discussion as we continue on trekking along.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.